Hey everyone, welcome to an Advanced Sports Analytics live stream, not an ASA podcast, of course, unless you listen to this later via Spotify, but for now, a ASA live stream. I'm joined today by Gus Elmashni. You can find him on Twitter at Sportsmanac, to talk over tonight's 7-game NBA SuperDraft slate. It's a rare 7 p.m. Locked slate on SuperDraft as I think 6 out of the 7 games all start at 7 p.m. And then there's an 8 p.m. game between Houston and Phoenix. So I'm here on the East Coast. It'll be nice to actually see the conclusion of the contest before I go to sleep. I don't think it's that common that I get to do that. But anyways, yeah, Gus, welcome. Thanks for jumping on today. Excited to talk through tonight's slate with you since you are working closely with the projections. And yeah, interested to hear your thoughts. So as you look at the slate from kind of a macro standpoint, before even looking at players, are there any specific games that stand out to you as kind of ideal spots to target? Doesn't seem like a huge injury slate, but I do think there are some kind of cues to pay attention to moving into lock. So anything that you're kind of keeping your eye on from a macro level as we head to lock here in the next 5 hours or so?
Yeah, usually I like to target the late games, as you're saying. All the games except for one are starting at 4 p.m. Pacific time or 7 p.m. Eastern time. So usually I like to kind of target the West Coast games because those tend to get lower ownership. Especially if it's a high-scoring game, like say if the Kings are playing or the Blazers at home. But I think we're going to see more spread-out ownership. Maybe, I could be wrong. But the two games that really pop out are the Minnesota-Sacramento one, which is one of the 4 o'clock games, again, Pacific time, 4 o'clock. And the other one at the same time is Washington-Toronto. Minnesota-Sacramento both play at a pretty high pace. They don't play defense. As we've seen over the last few days, Fox and Towns have been carrying their respective squads. For Toronto, if Van Fleet misses, Siakam definitely looks very appealing, especially because Washington doesn't do a very good job of defending strong front court players. They've been pretty thin on the front court lately. Trent and OG Anunoby look pretty good as well. Westbrook, I was hoping would have had a great game on Saturday night with Beal out, but that wasn't really the case. So, but Westbrook's always a dangerous player to fade. So, I would say those are probably the two. You got some games that look kind of like a slog, like New York, Brooklyn, definitely Cleveland, San Antonio looks like Detroit, OKC. That's just there might be value there, but I don't think I'll go heavy on those games, just given the slow pace of those teams.
Yeah, I feel like when I'm kind of diving into just games before even looking at players, two places to look are obviously Vegas odds, which love that Sacramento-Minnesota game. I'm seeing a game total of 235 right now. Sacramento always has like huge game totals. They just are a sieve of the defense. The Washington-Toronto game is the second highest total at 227.5. And then I like looking at our Team Pulse app and getting a sense of kind of the different paces that teams are playing at. Sacramento is not like a super up-tempo team. They're kind of like league average, but like you said, they're defensively pretty inept. And then that Washington-Toronto game is featuring, Washington's the fastest team on the slate, and Toronto is one of the faster teams probably in the mix with like Minnesota, Sacramento to a lesser extent. But yeah, so those I think clearly are the games to target. You mentioned there is some opportunity for value that could be opening up with Van Fleet being ruled out. The Houston injury situation, I think, creates some injury value potential. And then you touched on OKC, so I'm kind of with you there on possible value spots. I'm also seeing Porzingis is questionable. I think that would be a pretty significant injury and could create more opportunity for Doncic or a guy like Richardson if he plays. Could also create more minutes for some front court players for Dallas. So So you touched on some names, but starting at kind of the center position, are there any players on the slate that are standing out to you, either as true, center only players, or I think the most popular player that qualifies as a center probably will be played a lot at power forward, but also with consideration for these, center power forward or forward crossover players. What guys are you targeting for tournament purposes at center?
I did feel like Jacob Podol. He's been playing really great. He's got a great multiplier, 1.65. San Antonio's been leaning heavily on him. He's getting the minutes. Cleveland's front court was pretty weak. Now we got word that Nance and Jared Allen, they've been missing for a while anyway. They'll have Kevin Love in there, but and I think Cleveland's pretty much in full tank mode. So I definitely, and San Antonio's fighting for a playoff spot. So I definitely like him as a center only if you're going to use some of that flexibility for the other big men who qualify as both centers and power forwards on SuperDraft. Hesitating to talk about Alex Pokazvisky. We've talked about him a few times. The guy's a total twig. He's 7 foot, I think under 200 pounds, if I'm not mistaken. He does qualify center only. A great multiplier of 1.8. If he does shoot like 8 for 12, 10 for 12, or something like that against a weak Detroit front court, but he can also shoot for 2 for 12. So that's maybe it's minimum exposure. I think that again I did talk about I don't really like the Detroit OKC game. I really don't like Detroit players. I just think that's just such a mess. But OKC, I think they're running a pretty tight rotation, if not probably 8 men. Detroit looks like it might be going 11 or 12, more spread out. So that could be another center only. But if I had to choose between him or Podol, I'd probably go Podol just because he's actually been more of a proven commodity, and the ownership hasn't quite, I think, caught up to him yet. So it's kind of flies under the radar a little bit. So those are probably the two names I'd consider for center only.
Yeah, the thing I like about Pirtle, maybe why his ownership can be suppressed, is like he doesn't really accumulate much of his production as a scorer. He takes his fair amount of shots. Like I wouldn't say he's a total zero as far as offensive productivity goes, but he's a good productive shot blocker. Like I'm seeing he's blocked, had at least a block shot, and I think it's like I'm counting like 9 straight games. Great rebounder, has double upside, and lately has just been in a really good role where he is, I think, a lock for 30 plus minutes, and more than 5 shot attempts. He has the ability to get over 10 shot attempts, although it's I don't think it's a unlikely outcome, but locked to get 30 plus minutes. I think be interesting. They did have a day off, but San Antonio has played 3 overtimes in their last 2 games. I think that day of rest will probably fare well for them. I'm not really expecting them to kind of curb the run for some of their star players, but I do think it's worth noting. Pokashevsky is a potentially low efficiency player. He, I think I saw he's shooting like in the low 20% range as a 3-pointer, but still takes like 3 or 4 threes a game. For people that haven't, or I guess aren't super familiar with him, he qualifies as a center, but is very much a ball handling big, I guess. A ball handling big that can distribute, will take threes, but not at a super high clip. I certainly am a little intrigued by him at 1.8x. He figures to get 30 plus minutes and more likely than not to get like a 20+% usage rate. He's been over 20% in his last 3 games. So I think, he's worth some consideration, not like a cash lock or anything, but I think warrants some consideration at the center position. And And then, of course, there's these flex kind of forward centers. As you mentioned, I think before the show, like the price tag is tough for Towns, but he's just been paying it off with such high consistency. And on a slate where there aren't a ton of guys priced below him, I think there are kind of a fair collection of guys priced below him. And some of these smaller slates where he's been at 1.15 and been, the second lowest multiplier on the slate, for me, it's been a little hard to stomach that relatively low multiplier. But, with Harden, Doncic, and Westbrook all, multiplier priced below him, Beal, of course, at the same multiplier as him. Do you think Towns is worth good consideration? Probably a pretty strong cash play as well as a tournament consideration. And yeah, kind of transitioning into that forward position. We touched on Towns, but are there other forwards that are standing out to you as particularly strong values, either due to a positive game environment or injury-induced value, or some combination of both?
Not really injury-induced value, but probably a good game environment would be Julius Randle playing the Brooklyn Nets. That looks like to be a pace-up game. Again, the Knicks play at such a slow pace. I believe they're actually dead last, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they are. Their pace is at 98.1. But Brooklyn, they're getting better with the front court, with adding Aldridge and Griffin, and Claxton's playing well. And they still have DeAndre Jordan if they want as a reserve. So they're looking to be a team that will probably be a force to be reckoned with in the postseason. But still, teams that play Brooklyn who heavy usage players, if they get caught up in a really tight game, a high scoring affair. Julius Randle has kind of been forgotten lately because he hasn't really. He's somewhat underperformed given his value. And his multiplier is not great; it's 1.2, but you can have those 60-point raw 60-point nights, and then if you multiply that by 0.2, then you get those 12 extra points. Again, going back to Towns, that 0.15. He's getting 60 consistently, as you're saying. High efficiency and consistency. And still that's an extra 9 points you're getting, which can make a difference. Can put if you're like the top 50, and all of a sudden you jump up to the top 10. Again, I think Towns will have high ownership. I would expect him probably to be 50% owned. But if you're getting those guaranteed points, and he could even do better sometimes. There's nights where he'll have like 40 points, and 20 and 15 boards and 5 blocks, and do the math. That could easily turn to 90.9 in SuperDraft. So, so I would say those are probably the two guys that I'm probably looking at that are kind of that flex, the center forward eligibility, both Towns and Randle.
Got it. Another guy that is popping for us as a cash game lock, and I think probably strong tournament consideration, is Anunoby. It's been pretty impressive as of late. Just the role that he has taken on, I think, just very different from kind of his role last year as a secondary offensive option, and especially with the injury to Kyle Lowry, the departure of Norman Powell, who was taking up actually a good bit of usage in Toronto. I think Anunoby's kind of emerged as a primary scoring option for Toronto. He, since Powell's been traded, has been above 12 shot attempts in every single game, has shown the ability to take as many as I think like 16 shots, which is a lot for a guy that perhaps people still perceive as more of a secondary player. And at 1.65, he's still got a really good multiplier on him. Especially if Van Fleet is out, I think there's even more opportunity for Anunoby. So he's a guy we're really high on. Rashawn Holmes, we typically tend to be pretty high on, I think, on account of his high rates as far as relatively high rates as far as a shot blocker and rebounder. He can kind of be productive in a number of ways, and as part of that up-tempo matchup against Minnesota, I think there's kind of added opportunity for him to pad his stats with rebounds and such. Kenrick Williams is projecting really high, not the strongest game environment, as you mentioned. Detroit, OKC projects to be a fairly slow matchup, but 1.85x, got a really good multiplier on him, has been playing a ton of minutes. There's a lot of opportunity opened up in OKC with some of these kind of swingmen and guards out, SGA, Dort, Baisley, etc. No Al Horford. So, just a lot of opportunity in OKC, and the multipliers are pretty good on these guys. So I think Kenrick is worth some consideration. Let's see. You touched on Siakam. I think that's a good call. Just as mentioned, opportunity with Lowry out and an up-tempo game. Toronto's been super condensed with their rotations. I don't know, any other forwards we have not touched on before moving on to guard?
Not really. I just want to second your love for OG. He is 1.65x, which is lovely. I mean, if he has the guy can definitely rack up several blocks and steals, which are using the same scoring system as FanDuel. So yeah, if he gets combined like say 6, 7, or 8 blocks or steals, I mean now that's an extra 24 points times 1.65. Now you're looking at an extra 30 plus points. And if he throws in 20 points and gets boards and assists, I mean, yeah, he could break the slate. And given the matchup against Washington, yeah, that's great. I mean, I like Siakam, 1.3, but I could see him probably middling around 50 or so. And I've had some nights where, yeah, I got a bunch of guys getting the 50 and 60s, and I'm not cashing. If you're not getting those, and I think people are learning how to play SuperDraft better. So if there's someone who's got the potential of breaking the slate like OG, I think he's a really hard guy to pass on. And Kenrick Williams too, I believe. Sometimes he can take a lion's share of field goal attempts when all the other top players for OKC are out. No Dort, as we mentioned, no SGA, no Horford. So he's at one point. I would probably choose him over Alex Pokusevich. So I think we kind of covered it. I really, there's not really too many other forwards, and of course there's Towns and Randall, kind of the more your anchors. You could probably, if you want to think of them that way, and Pirtle at center. So I think front court, I think we're kind of in good shape there.
Yeah. One last thing on OG that I think is great for tournament purposes, and he will garner ownership, so it kind of I think cuts into his tournament viability, but I still think in an excellent place. The guy's just has all the properties of a high upside player. You look at the stats that SuperDraft rewards, steals and blocks, like you said, the 3 points, like FanDuel, but then unlike FanDuel, it has the 0.5 boost for 3-point attempts. OG, like half of his shots are threes. I'm just looking at some of his seasonal data. He half of his shots are threes, which is just incredible. Like he has these different he gets points through these high variance outcomes like threes and blocks and steals, where like if he just has a night where he gets hot in these different high variance kind of categories, there's just a ton of opportunity for him to blow up. And at 1.65x, steals and blocks aren't worth 3x, not worth 3 points. They're worth, more than 4 points. Or I'm sorry, more than 4.5, approaching 5 points for some of these blocks and steals. A 3-pointer is now not worth, 0.5 points, but worth almost a full point. So, he's just got these really great tournament properties. So really love OG as a play.
Yeah, I agree.
So moving on to the guard position, Williams is a kind of forward guard hybrid. Are there any standalone guards that are standing out to you as guards that you want to target? And I know as I look through some of our projections, there are some guards that are on the same team as forwards or centers that we project quite favorably as well. So I would be interested to hear kind of your thoughts on managing rosters that say, want to try to build a roster of like Anthony Edwards plus Towns would be one that jumps out. But, I think there are some other guard forward pairs that maybe could be rostered together, but maybe not. So interested to hear your thoughts on some of those considerations as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about Minnesota, Sacramento a lot. I like Fox. Fox is always a good one. If it's if Minnesota's putting up points and they're playing high pace, and of course their defense is non-existent, who's the guy that's going to come back the other direction? It's going to be most likely Fox, and he's at 1.3x. And he's had some phenomenal games this season. Of course, other guys in Sacramento too that could do well, like Buddy Hield or Tyler Halliburton. But yeah, Fox is just that kind of guy that just garners so much usage. He's usually getting about 20 shot attempts a game, and I can see him just slicing his way through Minnesota's defense. I also interested in Jordan McLaughlin at 1.8x. Seems kind of risky though. I just don't think he has quite enough usage or gets enough shot attempts, but he can be heavily involved. They've been giving him the minutes, and he's actually been a reliable player for Minnesota in the past. And they have so many injuries now, so that's someone you could take a flyer on. There's always Russell Westbrook. I'm a little hesitant at 1.15x, and I don't see him having. I think Washington's tired. I think just. He's been, they've been leaning on him for so much, and this is such an accelerated pace. And they did miss a lot of games early in the season due to COVID, so they're being forced to play a lot in the second half. So I'm a little skeptical about Westbrook there. His ownership will probably be lower, is my guess. Kyrie Irving's another one I like. He's always solid. I know Harden will probably be back, but he's that could be a pretty close game against Knicks are not a bad basketball team. So he's getting a lot of shot attempts there. We usually project him for about 20 shot attempts. There's always a Cleveland backcourt. They have nice multipliers. Just don't know them playing San Antonio. And again, I think Cleveland's pretty much in full tank mode. If they're not hitting their shots, that could easily sink. I hate looking at when I have the Cleveland players and it's halftime. They only have 20 super draft points. Okay, I'm kind of done here tonight. So I don't know if I'm really going to go too heavy on Cleveland. But yeah, I would say Fox is the one that that really kind of jumps out at me. And yeah, probably putting Kenrick Williams if we want to kind of use those other forwards. He qualifies as a guard, which I think is great that you have that flexibility. And Kyrie again. So if I were to pick my top three, I'd probably go Irving, Fox, and Kenrick Williams.
Got it. Well, when I do the shows with Brandon, I think we're typically very high on Anthony Edwards. Even with Malik Beasley back, Edwards had retained a pretty strong volume role, taking a lot of shots, playing a lot of minutes. Now you have Beasley doubtful for tonight, expected not to play. Rubio doubtful for tonight. Jalen Noel, who's played kind of a swingman role for Minnesota and actually received a good bit of minutes at points this year. All these guys are doubtful. I see D'Angelo Russell is doubtful. That's interesting. He's been straight out for a while now, but expecting all these guards to not play. I don't see how Edwards doesn't return to this 20 plus shot attempt role, minutes in the 30s. And you touched on McLaughlin. I agree. He seems like a guy who could benefit from the same circumstances that make us high on Edwards. But yeah, I like Edwards a lot. He can be low efficiency at times, but one of the more voluminous players at his multiplier. So I think sometimes these inefficient but high volume guys make for perfectly fine plays for DFS purposes, even if they, might be infuriating to watch if you are an invested Minnesota fan. Booker, we like. He can be kind of up and down as far as his production. It's really just tied to, is he having a high volume, high usage game or not? That can be somewhat difficult to predict. Same thing could be said for a guy like Donovan Mitchell. Reasonably intrigued by Cleveland guard like Sexton. The concern with Cleveland is always they play in just such low total games. They're a pretty slow paced team. Even with Allen and Nance out, the game is still only a 216 total. And of course, Kevin Love is now in the rotation, so it seems like he would counteract any usage gain that could be expected from Jared Allen being out. So I think we're just kind of lukewarm on Sexton, but certainly a 1.5x, I think, worth a tournament sprinkle. Any other guys at the guard position that are particularly interesting to you? If not, we can wrap it up.
A couple more points I want to say. Derek White, to answer your question, that's the first point. Derek White is someone that I'm just looking at right now. And the last 3 games, he had 17, 20, and 15 field goal attempts. Of course, the shot's not falling. He had 5 for 17 against Sacramento, which in San Antonio won by 14. So, yeah, they have other people who can contribute. But then the next night, he played, obviously that OT game against Atlanta, had 29 points. And he's at 1.6x. So I think that's something that could fly under the radar. That might be worthwhile. And Cleveland doesn't defend very well, especially in the backcourt. So that's another guy I want to make sure we don't ignore that is guard only. Yes, you do have the big names like Mitchell and Booker, but again, I think they'll probably be in that 50-point range, which might not be enough to take down the GPP and SuperDraft. Going back to Anthony Edwards, I love the guy. I think he's a very talented ball player. If his multiplier, I think his multiplier was higher earlier in the season. Now I believe it's a 1.35x. On the Advanced Sports Analytics site, if you do the player correlation app, you do see a negative correlation between Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns at negative 0.11. So they do somewhat cannibalize each other. So if we are hoping for a big night from Towns, which I would lean more towards Towns than Edwards, just because Towns does have plays playing a weak front court. Sacramento's has given some big days to power forwards and centers. So yes, Edwards will get his shots too. I don't know. I'd be a little wary if you are going to go Edwards, that maybe mix and match. I wouldn't go both Edwards and Towns. I think we're kind of seeing that problem with Chicago with both Vucevic and Levine. I think they both now started to cannibalize each other. We're both standalone. They were doing great when they were on separate teams. Now on the same team. So I think that's just something to just be size you have. When you are kind of doing the fine tuning, that's kind of the art side of building these lineups. You have the models, but then we start tweaking the lineups. You start looking a little deeper, like, oh, okay, does this make sense? And maybe not. So I would just be worried about that. But I think for guards, I think we kind of covered. There's Doncic, but 1x, no. Harden 1x, no. I just don't. Yeah, and I think there's just so much value that I think we're going to have to play those 1.5x or higher guys tonight. And and I think OG, I think we both agree, could be that guy. I mean, maybe he'll have the 100-point super draft night. That'd be awesome if he does. But I think he could. I think he'll top 80. I really do. I think it's going to be a huge night tonight.
Yeah, he showed that upside at that price tag, so I think it's within the range of possibilities for sure. All right, well, great. Thanks for jumping on with us today, Gus.
You're welcome.
Nice to talk to the guy who is, managing kind of the inputs of our projections on a daily basis. So, check out Gus on Twitter. He's got some SuperDraft specific as well as other site, lineups and such, and kind of sharing his thoughts about the slate. Check out contests on SuperDraft.io. They're still having a lot of overlay for NBA contests, and I do think there are good games to be played over there. So consider checking that out. And we will be back tomorrow with, I think, some MLB and PGA material. So stay tuned for that in the next 24 hours or so. And thanks for joining, guys.